Welcome back to the Snowpoint Cast. Today we're going to be going over a deck from RS to PK called Feraligatr Delta. This is kind of a sweet deck. Also revolves around one of my favorite Pokemon, which is Feraligatr. The whole line is pretty good, except Croconaw. But yeah, so let's get right into it. So starting off with 4 Totodile. Makes sense, you know, it's Feraligatr's your main attacker, you gotta play some Totodiles. So you play the Delta species Totodile. All the Pokemon in this species, or in this deck, are Delta species. It's got 40 HP, which is actually pretty bad. If it was 50, they'd be a lot better. Arcanine EX is a pretty dominant attacker in this format, so whenever I see a basic with 40 HP, it just means you get sniped twice by Arcanine, and that's dead, so kind of unfortunate there, but not much you can do about that. Single retreat cost, weak to lightning, and it is lightning type. It's a water type, but it's lightning type. It's kind of weird. All these Delta Pokemon like keep their regular typing's weakness, even though it's like lightning type, weak to lightning. Doesn't make a lot of sense either, but you know, we'll just roll with it. So for 1 colorless, you do scratch for 10. It's okay. The second attack is actually really good, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit later when we get into another one of the cards in this deck. But Rage on Totodile for a lightning on a colorless does 10 and 10 more damage for each damage counter on Totodile. So, you know, clutch in some niche situations, but with that 40 HP, you're not going to be able to utilize that a lot, but it does come in play a little bit later. We're going to talk about that attack in a little bit. So we also play 2 Croconaw. Croconaw's got 70 HP, single retreat, a weakness to lightning, scary face for 1 colorless, flip a coin if heads, the defending Pokemon can't attack or retreat during your opponent's next turn. So decent as well. I mean, it's not as good as Paralyze, but you know, it's better in some situations. Not being able to retreat can be good. For 1, you know, it's whatever. Slash for lightning at 2 colors does 50, also a okay attack in a pinch. You can use Scramble to fulfill that, so if you do go down, Slash kills a Pidgeot, so that's kind of cool. And then you also play that to play 4 Feraligatr. So this is the main attacker of the deck. 120 HP, which is actually pretty beefy for a stage 2 in this format. A lot of the stage 2s that aren't EXs are like 100, like Metagross and Dragonite Delta that are regular are 100. So having 120, it's a little bit higher than regular, which is kind of nice. 2 retreat, which isn't amazing, but also isn't awful. And then retains that weakness to lightning. The Poke Body is very, very strong. It's called Battle Aura. So each of your Pokemon that has Delta on its card does 10 more damage to the defending Pokemon. So this is one of the backbones of the deck. Battle Aura is a really good Poke Body just because it's always in play, and you also play a fair amount of different types in the deck. Not a ton of different types, but you do play some of the big weakness types. So being able to just hit stuff for weakness and plus power on that weakness means you can get some really clutch weakness KOs off of some of your tech Pokemon that usually wouldn't be able to do that because of Battle Aura. And it just makes your attacks like really good. Like as soon as you have 4 Feraligatr in play, your Drag Off, which is the first attack for 2 colorless, you do 20. Before doing damage, you may choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it with a defending Pokemon. So Drag Off, just a really solid attack. I mean, being able to choose any Pokemon on your board and bring it up and then do damage is amazing. In particular, this comes into play when you're playing against Pidgeot decks, because you are a lightning type, especially if you have, like, let's say you have 3 Feraligatrs out. Drag Off is doing 50 damage, which kills a Pidgeot, which is super clutch. Can be pretty detrimental to your opponent if you're able to just take out your Pidgeot like that. Not a lot of stuff in this format can do that. So being able to do that is really good, but just being able to snipe stuff wherever you want. I mean, it's not technically a snipe, but you get to choose what you bring up before it does damage. So your opponent never really has that option to just retreat and then hope that you don't have like a POW hand extension, because you always have that option to bring something up with Drag Off. So really solid attack there. And then Sharp Fang is pretty good as well. I will say before I stop talking about Drag Off max at 60 damage. If you have 4 Feraligatrs in play, then you do 60 snipe, which KOs pretty much every basic in the format. But even if you have 3, I mean, Drag Off for 50 kills. I'm pretty sure 50 kills everything in this format, but correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. If there's a 60 HP basic that I don't know about in this format, hit me up. I'm pretty sure it's 50 and 40 in this format, so Drag Off can be really good for killing Pokemon before they evolve as well. So Sharp Fang for 2 lightnings and a colorless, usually just fulfilled by a Scramble Energy or a Double Rainbow. I mean, you don't have any other energy other than Scramble and Double Rainbow, but a single Scramble Energy or a Double Rainbow and a colorless fulfills Sharp Fang. Again, this attack also kills Pidgeot. It's another good Pidgeot killer if your opponent has a Pidgeot in the active. But also just like your base damage, you max at 100 damage with Sharp Fang. 3 for 100 is pretty decent. It's not awful. And that is killing a lot. Like I said, a lot of the stage 2s in this format have 100 HP, so being able to one-shot a stage 2, definitely much better than hitting for that 2-shot there. So yeah, pretty solid main attacker. We're going to start getting into some of the tech Pokemon in this deck. So Spearow, 40 HP, again, not amazing. Colorless type, single retreat, a resistance to fighting and a weakness to lightning. Spearhead for 1, draw card. There's another Spearow that has more HP, And you know, I'm not sure which one is better. Spearhead is pretty good if you're in a niche, like if you're in a situation where you just start Spearow, nothing else, being able to draw cards is good. But also alternatively, Arcanine is a really good deck, so being able to have more HP could also be good. Kind of depends. Bombtar is another good deck in this format that 40 HP hurts a lot more than 50, so interesting to think about. I'll post a picture of the other Spearow, but you know, this is one of those things that it doesn't really matter, but it could in a specific game, so it kind of depends on personal preference, whichever one that you like. But you play that to play Fearow Delta. Fearow Delta species is a really solid card. 60 HP, which is really low for a stage 1. But I mean, the trade-off is the power that you get. So single retreat, resistance to fighting, and a weakness to lightning. Delta sign is the power. Once during your turn for your attack, you may search your deck for a Pokemon that has Delta on its card, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. So this is just really good Pokemon search. You just get to find any of your Pokemon, essentially, except for Spearow, and your Holland's Castform, Holland's Magnemite, or Jirachi. But all of your like main setup Pokemon and the Pokemon that you really care about getting into play, you get to do that with Delta Sign. So this is usually one of the first Pokemon that you want to set up in this deck. Fearow's power is just as soon as you get a Fearow going, you don't really have to worry about what's in your hand because you can just hit Pokemon every turn, which is a big part of this deck, is just setting up a board. And then Pierce, you can use Pierce as an attack as well. Not amazing, but there is some situations with Battle Aura where Pierce can be good in a pinch if you don't have a really good board setup. So for a Lightning and Colorless, it does 30 or potentially more with Battle Aura. And they also play a Milotic line. So the Phoebes Delta species has got 30 HP, a single retreat, and a weakness to lightning. So Flail for 1 fire does 10 damage times the number of damage counters on Feebas. This is an interesting basic to keep in mind as well, because Flail, like Totodile, is really low HP, so those like damage counter attacks don't really matter on this Pokemon. But we will talk about a Stadium that's going to come into play later. So Flail, important attack to know. Being able to hit for fire weakness can be clutch in some matchups. But the reason you play that Phoebus is to play the Milotic. Milotic is an awesome card. So Milotic Delta species has got 90 HP, significantly higher than Fearow, which is really nice. 2 retreat, which isn't amazing. Weakness to lightning. Seems like everything in this deck is pretty lightning weak, so you really don't want to play against any like Raydooms or any lightning type decks. So sharing is the Poke Power on Milotic. Once during your turn before you attack, you may look at your opponent's hand and you may use an effect of a supporter card you find there as the effect of this power. So I mean, really good. You essentially get to, I forget the Smeargle from Call of Legends. Its power, a portrait. You get to portrait. It's in a stage 1, and you know it doesn't have to be active, but being able to do that every turn is a really big consistency buff. There's not a ton of consistency Pokemon per se in this deck. There are some basic Pokemon that help you set up, but once you get set up, there's not a ton of stuff other than Milotic that keeps you going. But Milotic is one of those cards that can help you into the mid and late game, and it can be really important for sure in a format with Rockets and Min. Just to play a 1/1 Cloister line, Cloister Delta. So the Shelder, everything's got 40 HP or less, which is like really kind of dicey against Arcanine. You just got to be able to set up. But yeah, 40 HP, fighting type, single retreat, weakness to lightning. Ooh, everything is weak to lightning. Please, no Raydoom matchups. So for 1 fighting Shell Grab, you actually can't even use this attack, because actually you can if you have you have to attach a Magnemite or a Warp Energy first, and then you have to attach a Castform. So I guess there are some situations where you might have to use this attack, but it's really uncommon. So for 1 fighting, flip a coin if heads, the defending Pokemon is now paralyzed. And if it's going to be an attack that you might use, if you're dedicating a Castform to it, a paralyzed attack can be good in a pinch. But you play that for the Cloister. Cloister's got 70 HP. Cloister Delta species rather has 70 HP. Single retreat, it keeps that weakness to lightning. Solid Shell, which is a really good Poke Body. Prevent all effects of attacks, including damage, done by your opponent's Pokemon to each of your benched Pokemon that has Delta on its card. So it's essentially every Pokemon in this deck, right? Like, it's not every single one, but the majority of the Pokemon that you want out do have Delta on its card. And being able to not only stop damage, because like that makes a lot of sense. Solid Shell, preventing damage makes sense, but you also prevent effects of attacks. So if you're versus something else that like let's say you're playing against Dragthroat and you're playing against a Sneasel EX, and Sneasel tries to use Dragoff. Can't use Dragoff if that Pokemon has Delta on its card. So kind of a cool Pokemon there that can be really clutch in some matchups, and having the ability to drag off while your opponent doesn't seems pretty good. Definitely not bad. I actually didn't even really know that card prevented effects of attacks until I like just read it now. But the effects of attacks with the damage is really good. I mean, obviously damage is really good against Arcanine and against Bombtar and a lot of the other Ryegs as well. The snipe decks in this format, they play a lot of really good snipe Pokemon, like Raichu and Tyranitar especially are both like exceptionally good attackers. So Cloister is a really good counter to both of those decks, and it's good to know that this is an option that you have in some of those matchups. So let's play a 1/1 Sceptile line, keeping with that crappy 40 HP on the Treecko. Single retreat, resistance to water and a weakness to fire. First attack is pound for 1 colorless, you know, all right. And then shining claws for 1 psychic. Again, you're not really going to get this unless you get a weird warp energy attach or Magnemite attach into Castform, but shining claws does 10. And then flip a coin of heads, the defending Pokemon is now confused. Can be good in some niche situations as well, but really an uncommon attack that you're not really going to be using. And the reason that you play that Treecko is for Sceptile EX. So Sceptile EX has got 140 HP, single retreat, a resistance to water, and gains a weakness into the EX, so it gets fire and grass weakness, which, you know, doesn't really make a lot of sense, but we'll just roll with it, I guess. I thought that the Delta species Pokemon kept the weakness to their it's funny because early in the video I was like, oh yeah, they keep their weaknesses from their original type, but this Sceptile EX just contradicted what I just said. So I guess ignore that because it has weakness to grass now as well. I guess that's like bug type as well in the card game, so I guess bug type super effective against grass and psychic, which I guess makes sense, but I mean they could have probably done a better weakness. Anyway, the reason you play it is for extra liquid, so it's a Pokebody. Each player's Pokemon EX can't use any Poke powers and pays 1 colorless more to use its attacks. So really solid card there. I mean, this is mainly just an EX counter, but it's big against Blastoise. Being able to shut off Blastoise Rain Dance is essential in the LBS matchup, but there's a ton of other EX Pokemon that have really good powers as well, like Banette EX I was mentioning earlier, and Arcanine EX is another solid Pokemon that I've already mentioned as well that has a really cost-effective attack, so being able to force them to pay 1 colorless more, it can just mean that it gives you 1 more turn to set up and hopefully hit that board where you have a Cloister or something before your opponent just starts to steamroll you. There's a lot of other EX Pokemon in this format, Rayquaza Delta EX, so just a really solid tech in some matchup. There's so many decks in this format that are viable, and a lot of them revolve around EX Pokemon. So playing as 1/1 Sceptile EX can be the difference between holding your own against the EX decks and just folding, because I'm going to be real, this deck, there's no way this deck is like tier 1. It's not best deck in format, but it is a really cool deck, and it can hold its own against some of the other top decks. There are some decks that are a little harder than others, but Sceptile EX is one of those cards that keeps you in the running against those harder matchups that you have. Okay, so getting into the basics that you play. So you play 2 Holland's Castform. I'm actually not 100% sure about this. This list is from... I'll link the guy's name on Twitter. I don't remember his actual name. But yeah, Jonathan Perenata showed me this list from this dude on Twitter, and he's just got like so many interesting, like the Kabutops list, or the fossils list rather, that is going to be coming out eventually for ours to PK is also his, but he just has some really cool, I mean there's lots of room for deck building innovation in this format, and he's just done a lot with it, and Feraligatr Delta is an example of one of those. So anyway, 2 Holland's Castform. I think this could be bumped up to 3 just because Delta Draw is such a good attack in this format, and in this deck rather, because you play so many Delta Pokemon, and also it's just really good as an energy. Being able to attach that as a double colorless or double colored energy rather, is a really good option as well. So I don't know, I might like to see this bumped up to 3. I know Flygon plays 4 Castform. It just makes a lot of sense, just because you want to start it and also have it in your hand as an energy. But yeah, 2, it's got Delta Draw for 1. Delta Draw says count the number of Pokemon you have in play that has Delta on its card, and then draw that many cards. So if you get a Holon Mentor, you can just like drop 3 Delta Pokemon, like a Shelder, a Treecko, and a Totodile, and then all of a sudden you're just drawing 3 for 1. So definitely really good as well. Also has the ability to be used as an energy, so this is kind of an interesting card. I'll just put a Totodile up. So let's say Totodile has an energy, and if I wanted to attach Castform as an energy, what I would do, the Pokemon already has to have an energy attached. So you just attach Castform as an energy, and then the energy goes back to your hand, but then you get Castform is worth 2 Rainbow Energy. So kind of a cool Pokemon effect there. There's so many really neat side effects of cards in this era of Pokemon, like Swoo Teleporter and POW Hand Extension are 2 examples along with Castform that just have some really cool secondary effects, and being able to be provided as an energy is a really cool part of Castform in this format. Speaking of cards being able to be provided as energy, you do play 1 Holland's Magnemite as well. Holland's Magnemite has that same buff as Castform, except essentially it's the basic. It's worth 1 colorless energy. So instead of having to have an energy attached already, you can just attach it to any Pokemon as a colorless energy. So this can be really clutch if you have a Holon Mentor in your hand but no energy, because it keeps your attachments a little bit more consistent in this deck. And I'm not going to talk about the attack because that's not really something you're ever going to use. But it's got 40 HP, you know, sticking with that crap 40 HP vibe. vibe we got going on today. Single retreat, resistance to grass, and a weakness to fire. Not amazing, but not awful as well. I mean, weakness to fire Arcanine can be kind of deadly, but what are you gonna do? Speaking of weakness to fire, oh, okay, this also contradicts something else that I said earlier. Not sure if there's a basic with 60 HP in the format, so that is wrong. You can comment Jirachi, and then boom, you're gonna get me there. So Jirachi's got 60 HP, a single retreat, resistance to grass, and a weakness to metal. So Wishing Star, you can turn Jirachi asleep, and then as soon as you do, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, pick a card there, and then put it in your hand. So that's a really good consistency out as well. Jirachi can be clutch if you have like nothing in your hand but a Holon Mentor. Holon Mentor is a really essential setup card that's super good in this deck. But if you don't really have anything except for a Transceiver or like a Holon Mentor, what you can do is grab a Holland's Magnemite, a Jirachi, and something else, probably a Totodile, and then attach the Holland's Magnemite to your active, retreat the Holland's Magnemite, and then go into the Jirachi and hopefully set up with Wishing Star and get some stuff going there. So that's why you play just a 1-of there, just because it is a really good starter if you have nothing else in your hand but a Holon Mentor. Okay, so starting to get into some of the trainers here, you're gonna play 4 Holon Transceiver. Makes a lot of sense. This deck runs the Holon engine for supporters. Most of the Delta species decks I think probably should be running this just because there's so much support to it, like Holon Adventure being able to draw more cards. This deck doesn't play that, but Holon Researcher and Holon Mentor, just a really good setup efficiency supporter line. And so this deck plays 4 Holon Transceiver. Holon Transceiver says you can search your deck for a supporter card that says Holon in its name, show it to your opponent and put it in your hand, or search your discard and then do the same thing. So being able to get those early game Holon Mentors is really solid, but also being able to recover some supporters and use them into the late game is another reason that Holon Transceiver is a solid 4-of in this deck. Just play 4 rare candy. I mean, it makes a lot of sense as well. You're playing some stage 2s in the deck. Usually the rare candy rule, for those that don't know, you play 1 more rare candy than that you need. So 2 of the rare candies going to the Feraligatr line, 1 going to the Sceptile, and then you play an extra 1. Kind of a cool thing that you could do is if you have like a Milotic in your hand on the first turn, or a Fearow and a Spearow, you can rare candy into those Pokemon and then potentially get a second supporter off on the first turn, or just be able to search for Pokemon on the first turn, because rare candy does work like that in this format, where you can just go Pokemon, rare candy, stage 1 or stage 2. So kind of a neat play that you can do there with rare candy. You also play 4 Windstorm. There are some cards in this deck, like I was saying, this deck is definitely not the top tier of decks. There are some decks in this format that do play cards that are extremely oppressive for this deck. A couple of those cards being Crystal Beach and Cessation Crystal. So Cessation Crystal shuts down all of your Poke Powers and all of your Poke Bodies. Really not what you want to see. I mean, getting Battle Aura shut off, like all of your Pokemon that you like to get out have either a Poke Power or a Poke Body that's extremely useful for this deck. So getting that shut off entirely by a single tool card in the active is really not something you can afford. So I mean, 4 Windstorm makes a lot of sense. Crystal Beach is another card that does a lot of work against this deck. The only energies that you play are all special energies that provide more than 1 energy, so it all just gets shut off to a single colorless, and essentially your deck becomes not useless, but all of your rainbow energy becomes not rainbow and colorless. So it's really detrimental, and you can't really afford to just be like, well, guess there's a Crystal Beach in play, what am I going to do about that? But 4 Windstorm just makes a ton of sense, just because there are some really oppressive cards that a lot of good decks play in this format that can just shut you right off if you aren't able to find a Windstorm to get out of it. So it's the reason you play 4, just so it's consistent. You also play 3 Pokemon Retriever. I think in a deck that's trying to buff its damage by having Feraligatrs in play, this makes a lot of sense. But also just because, you know, your main attacker is the Feraligatr line. It's only a 4/2/4. So you're going to have to recover some of that line if you want to attack with, like, optimally, you want to attack with like 6 Feraligatrs in the game, maybe 5 Feraligatrs and a Sceptile EX, because Sceptile can be a decent attacker as well. Oh, I didn't even talk about that. So Power Revenge for a Psychic and a Colorless does 60 plus 10 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. So that is actually a really solid option into the late game, because like, let's say your opponent has taken 5 prizes off of Feraligatr, all of a sudden you're doing 110 damage for 2, which is some really effective damage. But Pokemon Retriever just lets you force your opponent to kill those 5 Feraligatrs first, and it just keeps you consistent as well. You know, 120 HP is a fair amount, but there are also a ton of decks in this format that can just hit that and be one-shotting you. So 3 Retriever makes a lot of sense. It just keeps your Pokemon recovery consistent. Just play 1 Swoo Teleporter. Swoo Teleporter is a really interesting card. So search your deck for a basic Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, and switch it with one of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, in play. All effects, special conditions, damage, everything stays the same on those Pokemon. So this is mostly so you can get rid of your dead basics in a matchup. So let's say you start a Shelder and the Cloister is not really useful in a matchup, or the Treecko and the Sceptile is not really useful, or let's say you started a Castform or a Magnemite or a Jirachi and they're dead at this point in the game. Like you've gotten into the late game and they're not really useful cards and you want to have that bench spot dedicated to something else. Swoop is great because it lets you switch those dead cards that you're like, I'm just stuck with this one bench spot and now I have a Magnemite on my bench and I really don't want to have that on my bench at all. So you can just swoop that into the discard and then get like a Phoebes or a Spearow or something and then evolve into Milotic or Fearow if that Pokemon's already been in play for a turn. And then as soon as you do that, you're back in play again, right? You're chilling. As soon as you get a Fearow or a Milotic, you can just that no longer is that bench spot wasted, and you can get a little more use out of your bench. So makes a lot of sense. There are some Pokemon that are dead in some matchups, and starting like even if you like, the reason you play a one of is because even if you start a card that you want to start, right? Like let's say you start a Castform or a Jirachi, both really good starters that this deck wants to start. If you start a Jirachi, like as soon as you set up, sure, there might be some niche situations where you're like, oh well, I'm not really drawing anything, so I guess I'll put a Jirachi up. But usually what you're going to want is another Pokemon out instead. Like sure, you can have the Jirachi up, but if you get a Milotic out instead, you don't even have to worry about that consistency because you're now finding that through another one of your Pokemon based consistencies, and it's got more HP and it's just better. So being able to have that option to switch the Pokemon out when it becomes not useful is a really solid option, and that's the one that Swoo Teleporter provides you. There's simply one Victory Ring. This is one of those cards as well that I think, not sure if 100% you need it in the deck. It is real kind of clutch depending on what matchup you're playing against. Like I said, there are some, you play just like a 1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1. These are all one of lines. So Victory Ring, what it says is turn all of your prize cards face up. You may choose any number of them and return them to your hand. If you do, shuffle your deck, then take the same number of cards from the top of your deck and put them face down as your prize cards. So this is great to just be able to take, let's say you're playing against a Bomb Tar deck and you have the Shelder but you don't have the Cloister. You're pretty much screwed at that point because Bomb Tar is too much of a powerhouse to take on without Cloister. But if you have Victory Ring, or if you can find your Victory Ring, that could potentially give you an out to potentially win that game if you need to find a Cloister, or like if you're playing against LBS and prize a Sceptile, there are some pretty bad prizes that you can have, and it just keeps you a little bit more consistent and not have to worry about, oh crap, I prized my Sceptile, I guess I'm just going to lose to every EX deck. Like that's not really an option that you can take with this deck. Okay, so talking about one of the spiciest cards in this list, Meteor Falls. I don't think there's any other deck in the format that plays this stadium card. So Meteor Falls says each player's active evolved Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, can use any attack from its basic Pokemon or its stage 1 evolution. So, I mean, that's kind of cute on Croconaw. You can use Scary Face if you need to, but not really useful. The real useful part of that is Rage. So, like I was saying, Totodile's Rage for a Lightning and a Colorless does 10 plus 10 damage for each damage counter on Totodile. This makes your max damage actually massive with this card. So, let's say you have all 4 of your Feraligatrs out, and someone has foolishly hit your Feraligatr for 110 damage, not a knockout. What an absolute buffoon. You're able to hit them for, and you decide to use Rage, so it does 10 plus 10 for each damage counter on you, plus Battle Aura, right? So it's like 10 plus 10, you're doing 120 damage. You have 4 Feraligatrs in play. You're now doing 160 damage for 2 energy. And even if you have a double rainbow energy, let's say you have a double rainbow and you're reducing your damage by 10, you're hitting 150, which kills every EX in this format. You're killing Blastoise. I mean, you're super killing Blastoise because it's weak to lightning, which I guess is another really good drag off target too. But just being able to hit for the absolute powerhouse of an attack, because nobody knows what this card is or even does. So as soon as you drop it, your opponent is probably going to be reading it first of all, which is a great feeling when you're playing a game against someone. But being able to hit them with a surprise massive amount of damage because they've calculated, okay, well, even with Sharp Claws and they have 4 Feraligatr in play, the max they're going to be able to hit me for is 100 damage. So I'm not really worried. I can put this 150 or like 100 and whatever HP EX up and not have to be worried about it knocked out. And then you can just drop a Meteor Falls and all of a sudden you're knocking your opponent out. So clutch option there. Another reason you play Meteor Falls, I think, is because, like I was saying, Crystal Beach can be extremely oppressive against this deck. So, I mean, you have 6 options against Crystal Beach with the option of Windstorm and Meteor Falls. And it's just like a really clutch option. If you want to hit for lots of fire damage too, and somebody's been sniping your Milotic, you can also use the Flail attack on Phoebes if you want to hit someone for some fire damage. So yeah, kind of a cool stadium there in this deck. You also play 3 Rockets and Min. So Rockets and Min, each player shuffles their hand into their deck, and then each player counts his or her prize cards and draws that many cards. So just a staple supporter card in this format. Almost every deck plays this card. It's really good. Shuffle drawing 6 at the beginning of the game, and then being able to hurt your opponent's consistency late into the game. A nice part about Milotic as well is you become a little less prone to admin like punishments. Like, sure, you can get admin to low, but now it's not just you that has to brick. Both you and your opponent have to brick, because if your opponent doesn't brick, and they get a supporter card, they can't play it during their next turn, so you could just Milotic for it. So kind of a cool part about Milotic there. And yeah, admin is just makes a lot of sense. A really good card. Speaking of really good cards, we play 3 Steven's Advice as well. Steven's Advice: draw a number of cards up to the number of your opponent's Pokemon in play. If you have more than 7 cards in your hand, including this one, you can't play this card. So just a good draw card. I mean, lots of decks play Holon Mentor, and they just bench 3 Pokemon and then start to set up. And so if they hit a Mentor, Steven's Advice is netting 4, but it can't even net as much as 6 if your opponent has a full bench. So definitely another solid supporter card there. Getting into some of the Holland supporters, you play 2 Holon Mentor. I think that's another thing about this list. I've been testing a lot of this format, and decks that play 2 or less Holon Mentor, I mean, not really many decks play less, but some lists I've seen play 2, and I'm not a massive fan of that, just because it's really vital for not only setting up, but also like it's a good card into the mid game because you're able to get stuff like Castform and Magnemite, and it's just like a solid card at the beginning of the game as well. Like, I think Mentor in this format can be the difference between being able to play a game and not play a game. So, you know, upping the Mentor count, I think, could be good. One of the things about this deck is there's not a ton of cut space, so it'd be kind of a little bit ouch to find a cut there. But I think maybe even a Pokemon Retriever for another Holon Mentor could be good. 2 might be fine, but that's something that you need to test. And I think, you know, maybe just 1 more Mentor could be good. Okay, so you also play 1 Holon Researcher, which is another really good Holon card in this deck. So search your deck for a Metal Energy, which you don't play any of, or a basic Pokemon or evolution card that has Delta on its card. So again, that finds you everything but Spearow, Castform, Magnemite, and Jirachi. So it finds you every single one of the evolution Delta Pokemon in your deck. So it's really clutch that you can just grab that with a Transceiver and then use it, or reuse it if it's in your discard. Just a really, really solid card. Both of these cards, by the way, you got to discard a card from your hand before you use them. All Holland supporters, you got to discard a card from your hand, which can kind of suck, but you play a lot of Pokemon, so it's not a massive deal if you have to discard one of your lines that isn't really useful in this matchup. You also play a Holland Scientist. So Holland Scientist says discard a card from your hand, obviously, and then if you have less cards in your hand than your opponent, you get to draw to match them. So there can be some massive hands in this format, like especially Steven's Advice is a really solid supporter card that a lot of decks play. And if your opponent Stevens for like 6 cards with a hand of 5, they have 11 cards in their hand. Even if they play like 2 or 3, they've got 8 or 9 cards in their hand, which can be a really solid net off of Holon Scientist. So definitely a solid one of them, and you can grab it whenever you want with Holon Transciever, and there are some situations where your opponent does have a massive hand. Okay, so getting to the energy, you're going to play 4 double rainbow energy. Makes a lot of sense. A single double rainbow, and then you're able to get your Dragoffs off. Double rainbow, unfortunately, reduces your damage by 10, but with the battle aura buff that Feraligatr provides, it's not that big of a deal. You just have to be sure to be conscious if you're going to play this deck of Battle Aura and Double Rainbow, because you could think, okay, let's say you're playing against a Pidgeot and you want to knock out a Pidgeot with a Dragoff. You can go, if you have 2 Feraligatrs in play, or 3, let's say, and you have 3 Feraligatrs in play, and you're like, okay, well, I'm doing 50 damage total, and then I'm going to be able to knock out that Pidgeot. If you have a double rainbow on your Feraligatr, that's not actually true, because it takes the damage away before weakness, so you're going to be hitting it for 80, which is really not great. So just be sure you're careful about your math there, because it can be a little bit tricky when you're adding with Battle Aura and then all of a sudden subtracting with double rainbow. This will be 4 Scramble Energy. So Scramble is another really solid special and energy card in this deck, especially because this deck most of the time is going to be going down on prizes before you come back, which is totally fine. I mean, Dragoff gives you that option, and you want to set up a board with lots of Feraligatrs and Fearows and Melodic. Like, you want to set up a full board, and then as soon as you have that full board, coming back becomes a lot easier, because Battle Aura is such a good Pokebody, and it can really, and sharing too, but like Battle Aura can just help you out. As soon as you get 4 Feraligatrs going, your damage gets a little bit out of control. So Scramble Energy, it's worth 1 colorless. It can only be attached to evolved Pokemon, worth 1 colorless energy, but if you're down on prizes, it's worth 3 rainbow energies. So this can be really clutch for a couple of reasons. You can't use it on Sceptile EX, unfortunately, but if you want to hit for fighting weakness, you can grind. Does 10 damage plus 10 damage for each energy attached to Cloister, which, you know, seems not seems kind of bad, but if you're, let's say you have a Scramble Energy and then you have 3 Feraligatrs in play. So you get a grind for 10, 20, 30, 40, which doesn't knock out a Sneasel, but as soon as you have a Battle Aura, you're knocking out a Sneasel EX, which is really solid card in Dragtrode. So knowing that you could have the option to hit for some weaknesses can be really cool. I think Fireball? Flare on Milotic can be really good as well. There are some decent grass type Pokemon like Vileplume EX in this format that sometimes you just want to hit for a bunch of damage, and Scramble lets you do that. So Scramble Energy, really solid card. Also lets you attack with Sharp Fang is what it's called. You get a Sharp Fang for just a single attachment, which can be really, really good as well. And then you also play 1 Warp Energy. I think it's just because you do have a fair amount of, you know, moving parts in this deck, and you don't want to be stuck in the active. Clutch Lock is one of the things that can prevent you from doing a lot. You don't play any like real switch cards, so if your opponent goes like Pow Hand Extension on a I don't know if there's a ton of like Clutch Lock options. Oh, I guess that's more of a Mulock tech, I guess. I'm not 100% sure why that Warp Energy is in there, to be honest. There's a couple parts of this list that I'm like, kind of questionable. So I guess the Warp might be one of the cuts that you could do for like a 3rd Mentor or a 3rd Castform either. I think those are the two cards that I would really want to see in this list would be a 3rd Castform and a 3rd Holon Mentor, just because they're such good cards in this deck. Yeah, so this has been Feraligatr from RS2PK. If you have any questions about the deck, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to get to them. But yeah, if you like this video, feel free to give her a like and a sub. It really helps me out. And thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.